What is a last responder or a death care professional? Back in August 2025, I contributed to an article with the CBC about a father who had to fight through red tape to bury his son at home during a wildfire evacuation of a First Nation in Manitoba. And it was through this article that led me to realizing that there is not enough involvement and engagement and contribution from death care professionals in the emergency management process, at least in the public eye. So, we're going to talk about that on this podcast and hopefully raise some awareness about this important role. Welcome to the Hazardscape podcast, where we discuss Indigenous emergency management as our small contribution to enhancing Indigenous community public safety in our efforts to reconcile the relationship between the Crown and all nations. So in Canada, there's a lot of regulation and there's a lot of guidelines around death care. And like so many other things in emergency management, it can get it can get missed or not considered because the system of emergency management is vast and broad. So it's like pet care, animals during a disaster, even persons with disabilities, different communities, women, children, elders. There's so many things to consider within the emergency management cycle. I think, as humans, sometimes we just have or maybe not even humans, but as colonized humans, we've always looked at, emergency management back in the day was 4 pillars, which represented silos. It wasn't until within the last, 20 years, maybe a little bit more than that it's been recognized as a continuum. And then through working with Indigenous knowledge, have we only begun to understand that everything is connected. And so now, we're having to tackle with all these little different areas within emergency management that maybe we're not considered before as a role. Like I would be very curious to ask, the owner of a small community who owns a morgue, what's your role in the emergency management cycle? I don't know I'd be interested to know what kind of answer they would give. And so it's the last responders that I want to focus on because we're seeing mass casualties in Canada, whether it's from active shooters, whether it's from pandemic, whether it could be from a natural hazard disaster like a wildfire flood. Luckily we've not had mass casualties, but that isn't to say that, our system isn't vulnerable to that. So what is a last responder? Why is it important? And, what can local on the ground community emergency management coordinators do to enhance their involvement? So to start off, first responder, very clear: police, fire, emergency medical services, humanitarian aid workers. They're all there when emergencies and disasters strike. But when we say last responder, we're talking about mortuary directors, funeral home staff, embalmers, crematory operators, and other related specialists, even including, some religious organizations, cultural groups and traditions within Indigenous culture and communities. They are all last responders. And where would they fit in each part of the cycle? So within mitigation, they contribute expertise on safe body handling. They can provide data and information on their capacity at a morgue. They can help even develop, you know, protocols, procedures, policy on, working in a mass casualty situation. They can participate in tabletop exercises, right? Maintain supplies that might be needed for mass casualty. You can even have memorandums of understanding with local authorities or, crematoriums and morgues, whatever it is in your community or culture that's involved in that process, whoever provides those services, you can talk to them today and get agreements in place on how things are going to happen and roll out during a mass casualty. During response, they perform identification and coordinate with coroners and health authorities, and they might even manage temporary morgues. They support family reunification, especially, if we're talking about First Nations peoples who have maybe been evacuated and, pass when they're evacuated, either due to stress or, other health related issues, even during travel. And I know a lot of the time when people are evacuated, if they don't die by the actual fire or flood water or landslide, there's a tendency for governments and, incident management teams to kind of not report those as a death of the disaster. They kind of try to spin it as an incidental, non-direct death, and to me, that's not right. So during a response, they perform at the hospital, the local morgues, things like that, a lot of support and materials, body bags, things like that, personal protective equipment, refrigeration units that might need to be on site. Within recovery, they're a great resource for grief counseling, helping with legal paperwork, death certificates. They can even support communities in commemorating the loss and supporting long-term mental health and community development needs after a disaster. So, if we integrate and embed death care professionals across all phases of the emergency management continuum, that helps to close the loop that begins with saving lives and ending with honoring those who have passed with dignity. And, like we talk about police, we know what their core functions are, and we know what firefighters and emergency medical services core functions are, but what about a last responder? Well, they can deal with rapid body recovery and documentation. They can, hand over the bodies of our loved ones with basic identifiers. They can log the deceased. They can help with the chain of custody of records. They can identify visual clues. So if you're looking for a loved one, you can provide those visual cues, and they can identify those on the deceased and report back if maybe they have found them and recovered them. And even personal effects to confirm identity, for both families and the legal process. It's very important. Safe handling and public health protection, right? There's dependent on the cause of death. You need personal protective equipment. You've got to keep bodies refrigerated or placed in refrigerated containers to prevent decomposition and pathogen proliferation if you're thinking about a pandemic, right? They can help with all of that and make sure that's all available. Temporary morgues, they need to be set up if it's a big event in a small community with refrigerated trailers, trucks. They might even have to repurpose community facilities and get them ready for that, right? Emergency management teams can help identify and track these available spaces. They can help with processing, and they can help with allowing authorities to allocate resources efficiently to this process. Family assistance and communication, very important. They have trained staff. Death care professionals are highly trained in dignity, providing clear information, arranging viewings or memorial services or wakes, grief resources, right? They can work, you can work with them now on culturally appropriate traditions and customs, right? That's all you can start doing that now. They can help with legal and administrative support. So death certificates, right? Talking to coroners and medical examiners. Once records are submitted to vital statistics, that process needs to be done because we need to get clear data on how many people are passing due to emergencies and disasters, especially disasters in this country. Those have to get reported in. Social Security notifications, making sure that their treaty card or their status card is properly taken care of and reported and not used and stolen in identity theft issues. The local death care professionals in your community or surrounding area can help with this. And I know that they're more than willing to work with cultural liaisons, elders from all Indigenous communities in this process. So why does integration really matter? Well, it's because you don't want to, we have this thing in emergency and disaster management where it's like, why do mass passenger airplanes crash? Well, it's not because of one problem. It's usually 2, 3, 4 things that are happening that happen at once. Never just one thing. So you want to prevent secondary crises with unmanaged remains that can become not only a public health hazard, but they could contaminate water supplies if they're not properly handled. Trust, right? If you go back to that CBC article that I mentioned, you just have to go. If you Google CBC Manitoba, Andrew Colomb, Colomb, Sun wildfire. I think it'll probably come up for you if you want to read it. But in that, it's about trust because there was no transparency in the process of reuniting the deceased with the family or the community during an evacuation. There was no guarantee of respectful handling or reassurance that the body was being handled and brought back to the community in a timely manner. Trust also kind of brings into focus that failure can lead to fines and liability if people are not handled properly when they're deceased. And then timely identification and dignified care, it reduces prolonged grief and trauma among family and survivors. Like, nobody wants to go 1 second longer than they have to in terms of not knowing where their loved one is, whether they're dead or alive, and who is looking after them. The longer that goes on, it just prolongs the trauma. And if you're already in an evacuation, if you're already involved in a situation where your community has maybe lost structures, you've lost your home, all your personal items, and a family member has passed, you want to minimize the trauma, as much of that trauma as possible, by having psychosocial stability. And death care professionals, involving them early, can help with that. So what would a framework look like in terms of this? It's really about, one, like anything in emergency management, you want to do some sort of assessment or gap analysis to understand I'll call it, for lack of a better term, inventory of resources available. so you can identify, the gaps. You want to formalize partnerships through agreements and memorandums of understanding. You want them to help stockpile essential supplies. You want to do training and exercises with them, running joint tabletop drills that maybe simulate a mass fatality event that focuses on chain of custody, family notification, those things that we just take for granted, right? We just assume that the system is doing that and knows how to do it well, but we want to practice that. Incorporating some different types of technology to help make sure that communities are aware of, who's deceased and where they are and who's caring for them before they get back to the community, and that cultural liaisons or elders are available in case they need to be somewhere to help support the ceremony or the traditions with, handling our loved ones as they come back. And then, reviews and updates. So they've got to be part of the after action review. They need to be there to observe, what's happened, what worked well, and maybe what could be improved upon. Right? This is all typical emergency management process and activities. It's just now we're applying them in the context of last responders. And then lastly, what are some practical tips for a community emergency manager or EM coordinator? I always recommend this because emergency management, if a community of even 200 or 100 don't have anything in place, it can be overwhelming. So you want to start small. Even talking to one single funeral home can get things started, can start as a hub of communication and understanding and knowledge. Start with one. Look at your existing networks and discuss the shortfalls or gaps with them. So talk to elders, others who have often experienced, wakes and funeral customs and traditions and burial in your community. Include them in your planning team. You want to educate with, simple information. What happens after a disaster? Demystify the process. Reduce the anxiety of what happens to our loved ones if they do pass during that time. And then prioritize cultural safety and sensitivity. Respect diverse burial traditions. This is for the non-Indigenous people out there. You've got to understand that just because your maybe religious-driven process or thinking or protocols or your government protocols are this, if you haven't engaged with Indigenous communities on cremation, burial, repatriation, traditions, you've got to be open, curious, and willing to advocate for them if some of their traditions come across as maybe not falling in line with your legal and regulatory requirements, right, in the profession. Working with death care professionals, in my mind, I think complete the emergency management continuum by, turning tragedy into dignity, safety, and closure, right? We want to recognize last responders to ensure that communities are not only saved from the immediate danger, but also supported through, trauma and the inevitable aftermath, right? We do need to uphold legal obligations and nurture the trust that is essential for resilient communities and societies. And we can do that by, getting more curious about last responders and the death care professional role in emergency management. So, if you want more information on this, we do also have this is on our Patreon post where, we go into a little bit more of a narrative. We talk about it as a community and work with, other First Nations, Inuit, Métis on developing those protocols, call them, for, involving this sort of subject matter into our emergency management program and plan. So, if you have any questions or ideas, please comment. Please share this. I think it's something we need to talk about more. And, we'll keep chipping away at it because I think we need to raise some awareness. Thanks for listening. Thanks for joining us at Hazardscape. You can subscribe to our YouTube and find our ad-free training videos by becoming a supporter on Patreon with a network of other Indigenous peoples looking to make their communities safer. And remember, know your hazardscape and be prepared.